Hello, beautiful people, and welcome, to the version Luna 1 Phase 1 banner review. Oh boy, do I heckin' love when naming conventions go out the window just so that we can have a patch that feels special. Anyways, Lauma's getting released, Nahida's getting a rerun, these 4 stars are certainly something, and oh boy. I will hold off on talking about the Chronicle Wish. I'll make a dedicated video for that. Let's just get right into it. Lauma is looking to be fairly good. I don't want to get into too much of the details on Lauma because I've talked about it a lot in the pre-release, but I do want to mention 2 major things that changed / were clarified about her. 1, next patch, they are buffing Bloom directly, not just through Lauma's interactions. Bloom's recoil damage when it explodes goes from 5% to 2%. That means that if you trigger a Bloom that would do 20k on the enemy, right now, in the current version of the game, it will do 1k to your character. In not 6.0. In Luna 1, it will instead do 400 damage. Less than half. That's a pretty big change to the Nilo teams because it obviously means that you're going to be a lot less reliant on healers. You'll have more flexibility in your healer options. You'll be able to get away with using Barbara instead of Kokomi and still have enough healing, which was something that wasn't really doable before that buff. So that's the first major thing that changed. Second major thing that changed / got clarified is we now have a bit more information on level 100 scaling for transformative reactions, and it is not the 40% that is currently present in the code. They're changing it for the rollout, and it is about 15% more transformative reaction base damage from level 90 to 100. The effect of that is there isn't that much of a difference between characters when it comes to how much DPS you gain from getting them to level 100. Pretty much every character is getting somewhere between 7 and 15% from being leveled to 100, like from 90 to 100, and the impact from your team DPS is going to be bigger on teams where most of the damage is coming from one character. This isn't that big of a deal because the level 100 thing isn't something that's going to necessarily be accessible to everyone as soon as it rolls out, but I do think it's a bit more relevant than people think. There's a lot of free-to-play players that have been playing for a long time, and if you have been playing for a long time, you'll have lost a bunch of 50-50s from your Fremos over the years, and then with the standard selectors on top of that, there's going to be a bunch of people that have a C6 of a standard 4-star already, and that can just select that one to get the Master of the Seal of Fortuna to ascend their characters. Anyways, those 2 things out of the way, let's just quickly do a TLDR about Lauma. Honestly, Lauma kind of just does everything Nahida does, but better. Her off-field damage application is faster than Nahida's. It's a bit weaker, but the strength of the application generally doesn't tend to matter that much in a lot of the teams where you play her. It's not faster than Nahida with the burst active and 2 electro characters, but it's about the same speed. The main downside, I guess, is your AoE is a bit smaller than the upper limit that Nahida can hit, and it doesn't last for as long. But in exchange for that, just in terms of like features, it carries over multi-wave. And features aside, she's just outright better. Like numbers wise, she's significantly better. Nahida doesn't actually buff Hyper Blooms, right? She gives EM to the active party member, but in Hyper Bloom teams, you generally want to on-field your Dendro character from more core generation. So you're only giving EM to Nahida herself, and she's not the one triggering Hyper Blooms. So none of Nahida's kit actually helps at buffing Hyper Bloom damage. She's just designed around generating a bunch of Hyper Blooms. But Lauma doesn't really generate much less. It's a similar amount. And on top of that, she has pretty big direct buffs to Hyper Bloom. It's not just for Hyper Bloom, it's also for normal Bloom. I'd say that there's probably not a single account where I would recommend getting Nahida and not Lauma. If you want a character for your Bloom teams, don't even look at this banner. Pretend it doesn't exist. How reliant is Lauma on 5-star characters? I'm still not entirely certain, but honestly, it doesn't look like she's too reliant on it. I've seen some Billy showcases from the creator server of people doing Dire with C0 or 0 Lauma with 4 stars only. And honestly, there are not many characters that can do that. And sure, the boss shills her pretty hard, but the point I'm making is that she is actually at a level where even her non-optimized teams with only 4-star characters can actually consider going for Dire clears. There's not a lot of characters that are there. Does that mean that she's incredibly powerful and you need to get her? No. But does it mean that she's pretty good? and you will likely have a use for her if you get her. Yeah. The biggest thing that makes it really difficult for me to really be 100% certain of how important getting Lauma is this abomination. Okay, we've had early leaks for the 6.1 Siegen Onslaught, and there's this boss who just has greatly increased resistances, and in order to take its resistance back down, you need to do lunar reaction damage. The thing is, Ino doesn't enable lunar reactions. Lunar reactions are something that, as far as stuff that's been confirmed so far, can only happen with 5-star characters. And if it stays like that, I don't know what the fuck to say. Like, that's way worse than Papilla, right? Because at least with Papilla, you had alternatives to Night Soul. Night Soul was better, sure, but if you didn't have Night Soul, it is what it is. But anyways. Overall, Lauma is one of the better characters, but you might not need her to clear Fearless for Hyperbloom content. You might be able to get away with Nahida if you already have Nahida. So ask yourself, like, do I need Lauma to be able to clear this content now? And if you don't, then don't bother. Next, Nahida. Honestly, she's not good anymore, honestly. The biggest problem with Nahida is that she was balanced around how powerful the Dendro reactions were in 3.0 when they were released, compared to other 3.0 teams, with the insanely high floor of the reactions themselves. And so they overloaded Nahida's kit with a lot of elemental application, and then pretty much nothing else, because elemental application was enough to make her really good. But now that we have a lot more alternatives, that's less and less valuable. And with Lauma, who just is outright an upgrade over her in a lot of her teams, there's just not really a reason to go for her anymore. Will that stay the case? Not sure. We have had some early leaks for Nefer. She seems to be an EM scaling Lunar Bloom carry, which means she's definitely going to want Lauma on her team, and she's definitely going to want some Hydro on her team. But the last slot is going to be a flex slot. And which character goes in the flex slot is not yet clear from the leaks we have. It's very limited information, but because she's an EM scaler that does direct lunar damage, she's gonna scale really well with EM buffs. So 250 EM from Nahida paired with 6 to 9 particles from Nahida's pretty decent off-field particle generation might actually be enough to make it so that Nahida is the best last slot in those teams. With all of that in mind, if she's burst reliant, Nahida's probably gonna be pretty good for her. And I fully expect Nahida to be the best last slot in her teams, but I don't expect her to be that far ahead of the other last slots. Again, though, keep in mind, very, very, very large grain of salt on this. We will have, obviously, proper Nefer leaks by the time this banner's actually out, though. So if you want to be more certain about this, I'll probably post a first impressions video on Nefer in the first week of the patch. Nefer stuff aside, like unconfirmed future stuff aside, right now, Nahida is just not really a good character. Because again, she's balanced around her application, but they just keep giving us characters that have application that's almost as good and also major buffs outside of that. Next, let's start with Kaveh. Kaveh was about to be really good, and then he isn't. If Bloom didn't get buff, if the recoil damage didn't get reduced from 5% to 2%, Kaveh would have been pretty much the only non-dog shit 4-star, like, quote-unquote healer for Nilo Lauma teams. Because Barbara's healing is just too ass, and Yaoyao's application is really bad. But since they Omega buffed Bloom by reducing the self-damage by a lot, Barbara is now enough. And sacrificing a Hydro Applicator to use Barbara instead versus sacrificing a Dendro Applicator to use Kaveh instead, using Barbara instead is a much smaller nerf. Barbara is honestly very interchangeable with a character like Kokomi. The main difference between the two is, with Barbara, you need to get closer to the enemies, but if the enemies move, you can move with them. With Kokomi, you don't need to get as close to the enemies, your AoE is a bit bigger, but if the enemies move and your sac frag isn't available, you're cooked. I'd say Kokomi's a bit better, but not to the point where she's really worth going for. Not to the point where she's really worth pulling, because of the self-damage buff, which was a reduction of self-damage. Anyways, the reason why this is a big hit for Kaveh is because the only thing that Kaveh has going for him is the sheer amount of healing that he can do in these Nilo teams, because he heals more than the damage he takes when he gets bloomed, basically, from his passive. So the more you bloom, the more he heals. It's only self-healing, though, so it's not perfect. but it's not bad either. But now that self-damage isn't really a problem anymore, the main upside to Kaveh is gone, and now you'd rather just use Barbara. Because of that, Rip Bozo. Kaveh's bad, so his cons don't matter, although I guess if you somehow play him in an Elo team and find yourself dying, his C1 is nice, but that shouldn't happen anymore. For people that want to play Kaveh despite his shortcomings, his C1 is nice because it basically makes it so you will never die, even if enemies are hitting you in those Nilo teams. The rest of his cons honestly don't really matter too much. His C6 can be a little bit nice for a bit more application, a bit more bloom proccing, but his ability to like insta-pop bloom cores is something that only matters if the bloom cores don't insta-pop, which they do with Nilo. And if you're not playing Nilo, you're gonna be playing Hyper Bloom or Burgeon, so you don't want to pop them. Like, just straight up bloom Kaveh, even with Lauma, not worth it. I mean, who knows? Maybe you can have some fun with it. In single target, bloom Kaveh, like no Nilo with Lauma, is probably better than current Nilo teams without Lauma. So you can have fun with them, I suppose. Barbara's cons are just really not it. C1 is 2 energy per rotation on an 80 cost burst. That means it would take 40 rotations to get your burst from the C1. C2 sounds like it matters, but it does not. Barbara is borderline unplayable without sac frag and these bloom teams, so reducing the skill cooldown doesn't matter because your skill should never go on cooldown. What you do with Barbara is you use her skill. Her skill has 2 hits while it's activating, and you hope that the sac frag procs on one of those 2 hits. At R5 sac frag, that's a 96% chance. And then by the time your E is over, the sac frag cooldown will be back up, so you just do it again. So this doesn't do anything. The hydro damage also doesn't do anything because damage percent won't help your Nilo teams, and Barbara doesn't really get played in teams where you care about hydro damage percent. Skill and burst constellations are actually the best constellations she has. Like, even if you build full EM, this slightly increases your healing, which is gonna make things a little bit more comfortable, I suppose. C4 gives you energy on charge attacks, but you don't really use charge attacks very much. You can use them for optimal rotations because charge attacks don't have ICD, so it can help you generate more blooms, but it's so much stamina that it's generally not really worth bothering. C6 is a revive with a 15-minute cooldown, so yeah, no. Her cons suck. They're not good, and you get a Barbara for free, which means that her being on a banner does not matter. And finally, Kuki. Kuki is honestly the main reason why this banner is not completely dogshit. Kuki is a good character for Hyper Bloom, no surprise for anyone there. And as it turns out, Lauma has a very good Hyper Bloom team. Lauma's best low-cost team is Hyper Bloom. By far. I mentioned earlier that Billy video of someone clearing dire difficulty with a 4-star only team plus Lauma. They did, I believe, Kuki, Singto, Kole. I'd say if you are going for Lauma, Kuki is a character who has a useful constellation, which is her C2. However, I want to make it like very, very painfully clear that it is not worth going deeper on the Lauma banner for Kuki constellations if you're at C0 or C1. Because Lauma's early constellations are not good. Lauma's C1 is bad, and getting Nahida is also bad. So, like, sure, getting Kuki's C2 is nice. 3 more seconds on your skill means that instead of being a 15-second cooldown, 12-second uptime ability, it's a 15-second cooldown, 15-second uptime ability. It has full uptime. In practice, it doesn't have full uptime because no one actually swaps back to Kuki off cooldown. If you're playing optimally, the C2 doesn't matter that much because the downtime that you have after your skill is over before the cooldown is back is when you can use your burst, and your burst duration is long enough that by the time you generate cores that can't be hit by the burst, your skill will be back up. But unless you build the R, you won't have burst every rotation, so that's not an every rotation thing, and it also requires your swaps to be even more precise. Personally, I am a massive Kuki hater for Hyper Bloom because it's a mix of a lot of things, honestly. One, Hyper Bloom is a team where your rotations aren't really strict, kind of just swap around to whoever has their abilities available. But that leads to, well, your rotations changing around all the time, and it can be hard to keep track of a specific ability and make sure that you always use it when it's off cooldown if it's not a burst. Because bursts, when they're ready, they shine on the bar on the right, but skills don't. And it sounds like a minor thing, but in practice, it actually matters. Her AoE is not too big, and her proc rate isn't the fastest. Because of all of that, I generally tend to prefer Raiden. However, pulling Raiden in 2025 is idiotic. If you like Raiden and you want to pull for her because you think she's pretty, you are not the target audience for this comment. But from a meta perspective, how worth your Primo Gems is Raiden right now? She is not. Not worth at all. And because of that, it kind of indirectly buffs Kuki's value. Because, sure, there is a character that is better than Kuki, but she's not strictly better. She doesn't give you the healing that Kuki gives you, which some people care about. So, a character that is a bit worse, but not even strictly worse, just situationally worse, but also situationally better, is available to you if you have Kuki. And so, getting Raiden is just not good at all, as opposed to getting pretty much anyone that actually helps your account. Especially on a Lauma banner. Especially for new players. Maybe you started on the Mawika banner, on the Mawika rerun, right? Or you're starting in Luna 1. If you look at the characters that have been released lately and the characters that are coming soon, we got Skirk. Essentially dog shit without Escoffier. True! No, I mean, good character, but her premium teams have 2 other 5 stars, and if you don't have them, her performance is a lot worse. Escoffier is one of those 2 5 stars. And outside of Skirk teams, she has other good teams, but she's not the only 5-star character in those teams. Inefa. Just Inefa taser teams are not bad, but they're not amazing either. Flynn's, who's going to be coming next batch on the 2nd phase, pretty reliant on Inefa. Lauma has this really nice thing, which is that you pull for Lauma, and as long as you get at least 1 Kuki on the banner, you have a functional team that is going to easily be able to clear fearless difficulty content, and that can be pushed to dire difficulty content, while using units that other strong meta supports don't really need. Or sorry, other strong meta teams don't really need. You look at Mawika teams, you're competing for Bennett, for Yonsan, for Sitlali, medium competition for Shilonen. You look at Skirk teams, heavy competition for Escoffier Farina. You look at your Verissa teams, Yonsan, Chavars, Pyro, can be Bennett, can be Mawika, can be Shangling, can be Pyro MC. Flynn's teams, Inefa, Sucrose. Well, those Lauma teams that want, you know, Kuki, Singto, Flex for Hyperbloom, out of those characters in that Lauma team, Singto is the only one we mentioned. And we mentioned him as one of the many options for Skirk, and technically for Flynn's too. But you get the idea. The Lauma Hyperbloom teams are teams that you can make without your units overlapping with other strong meta teams, and that you can make with pretty much just what you'll get from the banner. Technically, Singto's not on the banner, so you might not have him, but Singto's got the Lewa buff, so as a Lewa character, well, Lantern Right happens every year, so you can always just be like, okay, I'll just get him on Lantern Right. Oh, he's also currently in the shop, so you can guarantee him from there too. All of this to say, this is actually a very good beginner banner, despite 2 of the 4-star characters being pretty ass for beginner players, and non-beginner players alike, actually. They're pretty ass for everyone. Is it a good banner because of that? I wouldn't say it's a great one, but I don't think it's a bad one either. It's a pretty okay one. I think you're pretty happy to see this if you're a fairly new player that's interested in meta stuff. And this is just pretending it's 2023. Weapon banner. Oh boy. This shit is ass. This is one of the worst weapon banners we've ever had. Here's the problem. Nahida's signature is awful, because the stats that it gives are damage stats, not team buff stats, on a character that barely has any damage. The team buff that you get from this is 32 EM. Oh, wait, sorry, it's not 32, it's 40. It's 2 substats. My mistake. The 32 is the individual increase. For comparison, we look at Elegy, 20% attack and 100 EM. That's 4 rolls of attack and 5 rolls of EM. This is 2 rolls of EM, and that's it. It does give the character equipping this some stats, but the stats given are not that high. This is an okay stat stick for like Moani. It's an okay stat stick for Sucrose, because as a 4-star character, Sucrose doesn't have a signature weapon. Slightly better than your free-to-play options, but not by much. This is bad. And the other weapon here is Nightweavers Looking Glass. Low base attack, EM substat. The passive is something that pretty much only happens on Lauma, because in order to get this, you need to do Lunar Bloom, and in order to do Lunar Bloom right now, you need to have Lauma on the team. Gains 120 EM from the passive, and buffs the team's reaction damage for Bloom type reactions. Normal Bloom, including Bountiful Blooms for Nilo, get 120%. Hyper Bloom and Virgin get 80%, and Lunar Bloom gets 40%. Now, that sounds good, but it's in practice, much worse than it sounds. Let's say you're playing Kokomi on a Nilo team. With the new changes to Bloom self-damage, you can go full EM Kokomi, no problem. 187 EM on each main stat, 221 from Sac Frag, because there's no goddamn way in hell you're using any weapon that isn't Sac Frag if you don't want to experience pain and suffering playing Kokomi on a Nilo team. Then we have 80 EM from the Dendro Resonance, 100 EM from Nilo's passive, let's say 80 from the 2-piece of the flop set bonus. Let's say 120 EM from Flower and Feather. Your Bloom percent, so we get 80% from Flowers of Paradise Lost. Nilo's passive, let's say your Nilo's at like 68k HP. Pretty good Nilo build on the new craftable without the Ascendant Gleam. 68k, well, it's gonna be minus 30k times 9% per 1,000, right? So around 340% from Nilo. Then we also have Lauma Hail Him bonus. Lauma's EM, Lauma is 315.2 base. Triple EM main stat. She would be on Aetherlight, so 200 EM from that passive. Then we have all the same team buffs. Then substats, let's say about 100. Her set bonus, it's probably just Deepwood. And so her Pale Hymns with this are going to be, what is it, 472.2 times this. And then your Bloom damage, so your average Bloom damage is going to be around 54k. This is on the new event weapon for Lauma, Aetherlight, Spin the Loot. And let's compare that to Sig. Lauma's EM doesn't actually go up on Sig. Sig doesn't give any ER, so if you were playing a team that required the ER from the Spin the Loot, you'll probably need to go ER Sands instead of EM Sands. So you lose the 200 from the passive of Spin the Loot, and you lose one main stat, but in exchange, you get 265 plus 120, so 385, and it's basically the same amount of EM. And then you get the Bloom damage buff. 120% sounds like a lot, but you need to understand you're already over 1100%. So sure, 120% is nice, but the actual DPS increase is about 9%. And this is to your Bloom damage, which is the majority of your team DPS, but it's not all of it. And so the actual team DPS increase is a bit less than this. That's not as bad as Nahida's Sig, don't get me wrong. But compared to other sources of vertical investment on current 2025 teams, 9% is not very good. The difference is actually pretty similar in Hyperloom teams, because while the number gain is lower, the EM multiplier to begin with is also much lower, because in those teams, you don't have Nilo. Instead of having a bunch of EM multiplier from Nilo's passive, you just have a higher base damage from the Hyperbloom. So it's also about 9%. Although these teams have a lot more of their damage coming from the non-Hyperbloom damage. They have a decent amount of talent damage. So the team DPS increase will actually be lower than 9%. It'll be closer to 6 or 7%. It's not a terrible weapon that doesn't do shit like Nahida's Sig, but it's also not too good compared to other recent signature weapons. Basically, it's a sort of stuff that you're not too unhappy losing your 50-50 to if you have Lauma, but it's not really good enough to justify going for it on the weapon banner. And because it's with another weapon that is complete dog shit, it's not very good. Then the 4-star lineup, we've got the Flute. I don't think I need to say anything about the Flute, it's not very good. Sack Greatsword, Claymore characters just don't really tend to care too much about Sack. Stringless is nice, but there's less and less usage for the characters that want Stringless. And we're getting more and more craftable alternatives for the sort of characters that want Stringless. Dragon's Bane, good for Raiden and Hyperbloom, let's go. But you only need one, ever. The refines don't do anything. Good for Hu Tao, but it's almost 2026. Sack Frag is actually kind of nice. If you're a massive Nilo fan, you really want to make the best possible Nilo team. The best one right now is probably Lauma, Nahida, Kokomi. And Kokomi's best in slot in that team is Sack Frag. So if you don't have an R5 Sack Frag and you really just absolutely want to play that specific team and get as much vertical investment on it as possible for some reason, technically there's 3 weapons here that will be useful. 1,000 Floating Dreams is technically best in slot on Nahida in that team. Nightweavers Looking Glass, we've already said, is like an okay weapon for Lauma. And Sack Frag is best in slot on Kokomi. I'd say that's pretty much the only scenario you should ever pull on this weapon banner. Anyways, overall, this banner, pretty bad. It's not completely awful. As much as power creep has affected the game, that doesn't mean that old teams are now completely obsolete. You can still clear content with Nahida Hyperbloom. I've cleared content with Nahida Hyperbloom recently. It works well, but it just doesn't compete with the strongest meta teams right now. And there's no reason to pull for Nahida when the other character fits on the same teams and is better. This one, pretty good for beginner players, acceptable for older players, not the best 4-star lineup, but it is what it is. And then this weapon banner is ass. I would not recommend it to anyone except Nilo Sims. But yeah, that's gonna be it for the banner review. Hope you enjoyed, hope you learned a thing or two. Remember, you can get all the Primogems rewards from Siege Onslaught on an AR45 account with level 1 characters by just pressing the co-op button and having someone carry you on difficulty 4. And so, as much as Siege Onslaught is content that raises the difficulty of the endgame content, do not forget that you can get the relevant rewards from it, even if you're not at that point in your account. Don't get baited into pulling for a character you don't like just because you heard they're strong. If you're not gonna use them because you think they're an ugly loser, you have eyes. But also, don't bother. It's fine. Have someone carry your ass and go for the next character instead. Don't spend money on this shit game, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Bye, YouTube.